Was he having emotional outbursts? Did you notice any changes in his emotional expression?
Um, in the beginning, he was crying all the time. But in the beginning, it was super frustrating because he couldn't even push the call button for the nurses to come. And then when they did come, he couldn't tell them what he needed. So that's why we had to advocate a lot to make sure that he was close to the nurses station instead of being stuck in the room where they first put him all the way down the hall so that he would be totally alone. So being right in front of the nurses station, he could just call out in some way, shape, or form.
This is the Recovery After Stroke podcast with Bill Gassiamis, helping you navigate recovery after stroke.
Hello and welcome to episode 202 of the Recovery After Stroke podcast. Today's guest is Jeri Goldstein, author of the book Stroke Dialogues, Conversations with Dad, which she wrote after her dad, who was 85 at the time, had his stroke and struggled with aphasia. In those frustrating, long-winded conversations, the family was able to find some funny moments, and those are the stories that she shares in the hope of bringing some awareness and lightness to what is a difficult situation for many families and their loved ones. Jeri Goldstein, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Bill. I appreciate you having me at this late hour of the evening for me, but I'm happy to be here.
What time is it there for you?
10:30.
And where are you?
I'm in Florida, in South Florida, north of Miami and south of West Palm Beach, so smack dab in the middle there.
Sounds amazing. I'm in Melbourne, Australia. It's 12:30 p.m. here,
Wow.
and it's one day after
Yes.
you.
Yes.
So welcome to
I
the future.
thank you. And I know this because I have a coaching client who lives in Queen Queensland.
Mhm.
Yeah, and she would always attend my groups, which would happen at 3 o'clock my time Eastern, and it would be 4 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the morning, depending on Eastern Daylight or whatever, Eastern Standard. And she would always be getting up very early. And I also have a cousin who's moving to Melbourne.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Well, that's very cool. Melbourne's a good place to live. It's an amazing place to live.
sounds like
Um,
it.
you're on the campaign trail to promote your book, Stroke Dialogues, Conversations with Dad. But
Yeah,
before we talk about the book, I
sure.
love the way that you've just set it up in the background there, and you're making sure that everybody can see it. I love it.
Yeah. I, I I thought since the book right now, as we're talking today, I don't actually have a physical copy of it yet. I mean, they sent me a proof copy, but they have a great big gray banner right across the title. So it does me no good. But I did, my graphic artist and web designer got me a file, so I was able to print it out so that people could actually see it. It was a fun thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well done. You've got an interesting background. We'll talk about
Yeah.
that in a little while, but tell
Yeah,
me a
sure.
little bit about the stroke that your dad had and how
Yeah.
you became interested in having um, in having a conversation with people via a book about that situation that your
Sure.
dad found himself in.
Sure. Well, it came about that in 2012, um, I get this amazing phone call at 10:30 at night from his then girlfriend that said, "Your dad's had a stroke." And I was not in Florida at the time. I was living in Virginia. So having that kind of a phone call late at night was like, "Oh my God, what now? And what can I do all the way here, not being there?" And um, and my dad was an incredibly active. vibrant, um, creative, and functioned really well in the world. And so the thought of, on my side, thinking that he had a stroke, I just could imagine all the things he was going to be upset about not being able to do any longer, depending on what the outcome was, which at 10:30 at night, we didn't know what was going on. We didn't know what kind of a stroke, we didn't know how serious, we didn't know anything. So that started the ball rolling.
So, how old was your dad at the time?
He was 84 going on 85.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, when I hear about somebody having a stroke at 84, 85,
Yeah.
uh, it's like, oh, yeah, that's the right territory. That's kind of the right
Right.
time when you hear about it. And all
Right.
the young people that I know who have had a stroke
I
always
know.
say, I thought that stroke only happens to older people.
I
And
know.
they get really caught unaware. So when you heard that your dad had a stroke, it's clearly not a nice thing to hear, but is it something like, oh, like, okay, well, that kind of makes sense, or
But
do you go into the same denial that we went into? Because he's your dad, you love him, and regardless of his
right.
age,
Right.
you're not
Right.
you're not connecting stroke to his life.
No, I mean, I'm not connecting stroke to age. I've got a lot of friends and musician friends in particular who have had strokes at their very early on in their career, early on in their lives. And um and but the immediate thought was thinking about the people who I personally knew. So that was my grandmother who had a stroke at, you know, 80 something, and it was my cousin who had a stroke maybe at 60 something and was very alone during the time when she had her stroke. So it was going to be a 20 to 25-year period that she would be, you know, riddled with the results of the stroke because nobody got to her in time like they got to my dad. I mean, within 7.5 minutes, he was at the hospital,
Yeah, right.
getting TCP, and so he was in the prime window of opportunity to make this be as um, less harsh as possible, if that could be the term.
Oh, yeah, well, that is a term. I mean,
Yeah,
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 less
yeah.
damaging or less harsh.
Less
That's fine.
damaging, right, right.
Yeah. And what was the cause of the clot that occurred?
It was an ischemic stroke, and so I don't know that they know where it came from. Um, at least I don't know that we ever got that information, but it was left brain, right side of the body that was affected,
Right. Okay.
as well as the expressive aphasia.
Okay. And then were you able to get to him rapidly when you found out? Were you able to be with him immediately, or?
Well, it took me a couple of days to get down there because I heard about it on Sunday. We didn't know what was going on until Monday morning. And then I had to make plans because I had to figure out, well, am I flying? Am I driving? How long am I going to be there? What were all the scenarios that I had to figure on in order to, you know, possibly stay for a long time?
And
Um,
were you the only family member that?
my sister did fly down.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was my sister and myself, and we were there, but I got there Wednesday. Like, so it happened Sunday. I had a drive, and I finally got there by Wednesday, and then my sister flew down and she was there Wednesday also.
What's it like seeing your dad in that situation the first time that you saw him?
Um, there he is in the room right past where my mom had passed away in the hospital cubicle. And there was dad looking small and scruffy, not having had his beard shaved, and so that always makes somebody look worse. um, but he was in good hands. He was in the ICU when I saw him, so intensive care unit. So there were lots of people around. So he was being attended to. And then he also had lots of friends that were here in the community so that he was able to have lots of visitors. But the
Was that a good thing?
interesting, that was a good thing because he doesn't like being alone, and it was a good thing because people who knew him could advocate on his behalf. They could say things, like, well, I know him, he likes this or he doesn't like that in terms of food choices and those kinds of things. And he didn't feel so alone compared to how alone he was feeling in his head because he couldn't express himself. At that moment, words were not coming out that he was thinking. They were all, his the term that came out was plus. Everything was plus.
Uh-huh.
People were plus, everybody was plus, and there were and numbers. Everything was a number except for me. I He always called me baby, and I
Oh,
was and I was still baby.
wow. That's
You
awesome.
know, it was weird,
That's a little
but
bit
I
of
never was so
differentiation.
excited. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I was very excited to know that that was still there, but
Mm.
everybody else was plus one, plus two.
It's such a strange situation. And I remember my godfather passed away probably 2 and a bit years ago, and he was in his 80s and he had a brain tumor.
Oh wow!
And and it was a non-cancerous tumor, but it was just growing. And as a result of its growth and being
Right,
inoperable,
right,
it caused every part of him to slowly just stop working. And
right, right,
even though he was on his feet and able to uh, kind of appear upright and all that type of thing, he
right,
wasn't able to express himself. And
right.
unfortunately, the only word he knew and the only word he would use for everything was a 4 letter word that starts with F.
Yeah.
And and it was kind of interesting, weird, strange, funny, sad, all at the same time.
Right,
Having to spend time with him and get him and hear him somehow try to express himself, and that's the only thing that came out, was
wow,
just so strange and
wow.
difficult to hear. You know.
Right. Oh, very difficult, and very very difficult to try to steer the person
Mm,
into some other form of communicating. I'm sure.
yeah, and of course it's abrasive when you hear that word. I mean,
Totally.
I'll say it now. Fuck is abrasive to hear
Right. Right.
for everything,
Right.
every
Every word, every sentence,
for everything,
everything. Right.
every response,
Right.
every request that's made of him, for everything. It's just
Right.
really abrasive, and it's shocking to hear that
Right.
coming from him, and then you kind of have to reconcile that and go, hang on a sec,
Right.
that
Right.
this is not the
Right.
conversation that's happening. It doesn't mean what it's how it's being said. None of that is relevant. It's just a noise that's coming out of his mouth, and for some strange reason
Right.
that happens
That's
to
the
be the only
noise.
noise.
Yeah. But I mean, you can imagine how for I don't know your experience with, were you affected by aphasia?
Not that kind, not in that
Yeah.
sense. I was unable to begin sentences and finish sentences at one
Right.
point in time. I didn't know what I was trying to say. I didn't
Right.
know. I knew what I was trying to say. I couldn't find the words at some
Right.
point, but it was only for a small amount of time. So my experience was, I mean, it's really hard for me to even connect to it. It was that long ago, and it was
Right.
for such a
Right.
small amount of time, but it was in the months.
Right.
And I would get frustrated when my wife, because it was so early on for us and didn't understand her,
Right.
didn't understand what I was going through. She'd be waiting for me to finish or start a sentence and be going, yeah, come
Yeah.
on. Yeah,
Right.
get it out, spit it out.
Right. Right.
That was really the hard part, is dealing with her reaction to me, because
Right.
she was completely ignorant about what might be happening. And of course, I didn't actually know what was happening
Right. Sure.
and what the issue was, because I wasn't diagnosed. I know that I experienced that now because
Sure.
I've spoken to so many people about it and I've reflected on my time, but I wasn't officially diagnosed because I didn't actually get a uh, a neuropsychological assessment, which is the one that tests your cognitive abilities. And I was struggling for about 9 months to a year
Wow.
just to understand where my cognitive abilities were. And that meant that I had to deal with, the speech issue. I had to deal with not being able to type an email, read,
Right.
drive, work.
Right.
And it wasn't through lack of physical ability. It was all, at that time, it was through lack of cognitive ability.
Sure. Sure.
And nobody recommended anything
Wow.
to me about getting a baseline for where I'm at
Wow.
so that I could
That's
get some help.
amazing.
Yeah, I
That's
missed it.
amazing.
I was missed completely.
Because one of
So
the
that's my
things that,
experience.
but because one of the things that you mentioned is, about your wife not, wanting you to finish a sentence or start a sentence. And I noticed that a great deal with visitors, friends that would come, that would want to visit and ask questions and not really have a sense of how dad was or was not able to respond, or complete a thought. And so they would, I was always, and my sister was always trying to get him um, to work at it, to get to his own conclusion, to think it through if he could think through, the lack of language capability. But others wanted to just fill in the blank,
Mm,
like if they would ask a question and they knew the answer, they
mm,
would just fill it in for him. And I found myself being kind of a director of like, no, no, let dad work at this, give it a few minutes. You don't have to fill in the answer. And so I would be teaching, not that I knew what I was doing, but I would just intuitively think he's got to work it. He's got to come to this conclusion. And if it takes a day, if it takes all week, we've got to work it with him and allow that moment of recognition to happen no matter when it happens.
it's such a terrible habit that people get into, and they do it to children. I know a
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
the people who I hang out with that have young children, and you'll go over to their home and you'll have a chat, and then you'll see the child and you'll interact with the child, and then
Right.
you'll say, hi, how are you? And then the parents answer,
Right.
and it's
It's a
like,
similar thing. Yeah.
yeah, shut up, don't answer
Yeah.
for your kid. And then I'll
Yeah.
say,
Give
how's
give the
school?
kid a chance. Right.
Yeah, and I'll say, how's school? And then they'll answer, and then
Right.
they'll say, oh, sorry, my kid's a bit shy, because
Right.
it doesn't need to speak because you're speaking on
Right.
its behalf. But
Right.
you really can't say that to them either, because that's a bit
No.
rude or
Well,
whatever, or if the mic is taken the wrong way. So you try and navigate that
right.
And I often get kids on their own. I'll try and get them
Yeah.
just where their parents are distracted for a moment and just
Have a
interact with them.
conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And
even
let
if it
them
takes a
talk.
long time because they're shy or whatever,
Right.
or they don't know how to answer, it's like, okay, no problem.
Yeah.
If you don't want to chat, you don't want to chat.
Right. Right. But I know with this situation, it was, you know, knowing full well that everything was locked in his mind, that he knew all of the questions to ask, and he knew all the things he was trying to get to, but didn't have the facility of words and the ability to put the words together because they just weren't coming out, or the sense of, time, or what things were, or how do you touch your nose, what is your nose, what are those things, and for me it was just sad, but also a challenge to keep working at it, and be there to keep the conversations going. And so that's when all these funny conversations came out of him just trying to get to his answers for
Mhm.
all of the missing links, that and missing pieces, and understanding all of this stuff. So
Yeah. So how long was dad in hospital?
um from about a month and a half.
Okay.
That included rehab, so about a week in the hospital, and then the rest of the time was in rehab and doing the rehabilitation.
And then when he went home,
Yeah.
he was, I imagine, still left with those challenges communicating. Was he
Yes.
dealing with any physical deficits?
Yeah, his right hand, he couldn't use his right hand, and he was right-handed,
Yeah.
of course. you know. So most of the challenges, he started coming back with the cognitive, um, and speech started to come back. He in the hospital, he regained his sense of time, regained his sense of how to do certain things. I worked with him, and other people worked with him all the time. His conversations became more fluid, but he still had to work at it. And he did speech therapy for almost a whole year to get back to
Mm.
the, you know, real life situations and what things meant and how do you say these things. And then learning how to do everything with his left hand, and I'm sure you've spoken to lots of people who had to just swap over,
Mm. Mm.
and so writing with his left hand, eating, and then of course you're not having the two hands, so having other people do stuff for you, open packages, cut your food, so there's a part of it that was also embarrassing, not being able to have a um, full facility of what you knew before, and to have to constantly depend on people.
And does that also mean that he had to help people shower him and toilet him and
Yes,
all that type of thing?
yeah, we had an aide that was helping for like 8 hours a day to take him to doctor's appointments and rehab and all of that. So yeah, I was very fortunate that we were able to have a fabulous aide to work with dad, and also helped him with his speech therapy homework, and he worked hard every single day. He worked for hours and hours at both exercises, dexterity exercises, physical exercises, as well as speech and cognitive exercises.
So it
And
sounds like he had a really good recovery mindset. He was really keen.
after after a while, I mean, he was very depressed in the hospital and had to actually get him some uh, anti-anxiety meds in order for him to be able to do the work because he was depressed and upset. And um, but when he got home, he was determined, and I was in awe of his determination and how uh, e- enthusiastic he was to do the work that was required. Um,
Was he
to get
having was he having emotional outbursts? Did you notice any changes in his emotional expression?
um,
If you've had a stroke and you're in recovery, you'll know what a scary and confusing time it can be. You're likely to have a lot of questions going through your mind. Like, how long will it take to recover? Will I actually recover? What things should I avoid in case I make matters worse? Doctors will explain things, but obviously you've never had a stroke before. You probably don't know what questions to ask. If this is you, you may be missing out on doing things that could help speed up your recovery. If you're finding yourself in that situation, stop worrying and head to recoveryafterstroke.com, where you can download a guide that will help you. It's called 7 Questions to Ask Your Doctor About Your Stroke. These 7 questions are the ones Bill wished he'd asked when he was recovering from a stroke. They'll not only help you better understand your condition, they'll help you take a more active role in your recovery. Head to the website now, recoveryafterstroke.com, and download the guide. It's free.
in the beginning, he was crying all the time. But in the beginning, it was super frustrating because he couldn't even push the call button for the nurses to come. And then when they did come, he couldn't tell them what he needed. So that was super frustrating for him, um, and and difficult, And so that's why we had to advocate a lot to make sure that he was close to the nurses' station instead of being stuck in the room where they first put him all the way down the hall, so that he would be totally alone. So being right in front of the nurses' station, he could just call out in some way, shape, or form, you
Yeah, that's a good move, actually. I like that one.
know.
And it's lovely that they facilitated that. That's excellent.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was an important thing before before we even left the hospital the first day they moved him to rehab. We definitely had to make that happen because it was so evident that he's just going to be stuck there,
Hmm.
you know.
Yeah, that's really good. I like it. I like that's just such a different, like it's a simple thing, but it's such a great approach just to solve a problem. It's a massive problem. You need a
Right,
really effective and simple
right,
solution. And all it went was just moving his bed so he can physically, express that he
right.
needs a little bit of help because he can't do this other thing, which is press a button
Yeah,
or move himself in the bed to get attention that he needs. That's just it's genius. It's so simple, logical, and genius, and yet you know probably
well,
overlooked many times for
yeah,
many people.
I'm sure. And I can only feel for people who might be in this situation but that don't have family members or don't have, the kind of support system that thankfully dad had. And being alone in that situation, uh, you can't express yourself to advocate for yourself. And so you're relying on the medical professionals to help you in whatever way they can. But if you can't express yourself, they're doing things as they know that need to be done, but
Yeah,
not necessarily targeted for that particular person's needs.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it was challenging, but we had to come up with things on the fly all the time.
yeah. I get to coach people on their recovery journey, and one of the people I've helped in the past was probably in their 70s, and at that time, there's a sense for that particular person. There was a sense of life's almost over, and what am I working for, and what am I
Right.
trying to achieve and overcome? Did you get a sense for your dad what it was that he was working towards in his early to mid 80s? What is he striving to do and achieve and get back to,
Right. Right.
or um, recover for? What was his reason for recovering?
Well, mom had passed a number of years prior to him having his stroke, and he had gotten into a new relationship, even at that age, with his longtime friend who also had lost her husband. So they were together, and they were having a great time. They were playing bridge. They were good at it. They had a whole group of friends, and dad was a very he functioned brilliantly. He would learn computer programs. He was helpful to all of his friends and neighbors. He did everything for himself except cook. Cooking, not cooking. But he was really able to do math, to do his finances, to do everything. And so there was a period when the therapies were done. He was home. It was kind of going towards March or April. I was still decided to be there. And I sat him down and said, Dad, let's set your goals for full recovery. What does that look like to you? And what would be helpful for us to know to help you do so you can reach whatever goals you want. And we just sat there for a good couple of hours, and he made a list of the things that he wanted to get back. He wanted to get back the use of his right hand. He wanted to get back to doing puzzles in the newspaper, that he liked to do the word puzzles and the Sudoku. And he wanted to be able to play bridge with his bridge group. That was a big thing. And he wanted to be able to do math. He wanted to use the computer and use a mouse. And things that normally he wanted to be able to do the dishes again and iron his clothes. So all the things that that make up a life that you do on a daily basis. And these were his goals. These were things that we put on this sheet, this newsprint sheet, and magic marker with circles. I call it cluster brainstorming, or that's the term for it. And I do this with my clients all the time, my coaching clients and musicians, but I just said this is something that he could do. And then we hung it on the dining room wall when we were finished with the sheet so that we could see it every day and he could see it every day. And we would check off the things that were being accomplished. And it gave him a sense of purpose. It gave him a sense that um, he was accomplishing things that were near and dear to him. It wasn't like, "Oh, Dad, you should do this." It was what he decided to do, and I thought that that was extremely important for him, based on knowing who my dad was and knowing how he was clearly driven to get back to himself.
Yeah, that's inspiring. That's really good because, look, I know I mentioned the person that I was helping out was in their 70s and they were giving up hope, but people do that in their 60s and 50s and 40s. So it's great that
Yeah,
that's a great example. And if anyone who's watching or listening, feels that might be path that they're heading down, the giving up path, there's really
right,
no reason to give up.
right.
I mean, you may as well go for gold and have the best experience you can possibly have for the amount of time that you've got left, and then
Absolutely.
and then and you don't know how long that is. It could be short, it could be long, it
Sure,
could be a
sure.
decade, it could be two. So
Right.
let's just assume that it will be, and then go for it. Go for
Do the
the
best you can. Right.
yeah, yeah. Um, you're you're a bit of a, well, I wouldn't say prolific, but you've written a few books, and the books that you've written are around the work that you do in the music industry and helping
Mhm.
performing artists in
Right.
different
Right.
ways. And I
Right.
kind of understand the reason why you wrote those other books. So one of them says, how to be your own booking agent.
Right.
That's a great thing to sell to a group of musicians, is how to get gigs, right? I get that part. It's
Sure.
solving a
That's
problem.
right. Exactly.
And that's your space. And then the other one is get great gigs, and that's your podcast. That's
Sure.
something that you do and help out people with. And then you've got the the tiny guide to
Guide.
huge success, 100 business boosting hot tips to ignite your performing career. And that title is the one that I like the best because I relate to it. It says, the tiny guide to huge success.
Yep. Yep.
And that's really what it is. Success isn't huge because you've done huge things to get there. It's huge
Sure.
because you've done a lot of little things to get there.
Absolutely. Step by step.
Yeah. And I get how they all are great things for people in the industry that you're good at or that you work in or that
Right.
like it's
Right.
speaking to your niche, right?
Right.
But then you wrote a book about stroke.
I know.
And I know your dad had a stroke, but it
Yeah.
still seems a little bit out of the ordinary. The book's
Yeah.
called Stroke Dialogues, Conversations with Dad.
Right.
And before I get you to tell me why you wrote the book,
Okay.
what I want to do is I want to bring up the copy and I want to read a little bit of the introduction. I want to read the first paragraph to the
Sure.
introduction.
Sure.
And it goes, you can never plan for the moment that upends your life as you know it. Having a stroke is one of those life-changing moments. For Dad, that moment was terrifying. It set him on a path in search of the man he knew before his stroke. For me, it reconnected me to family and friends. Together, we began a journey not of our own choosing, and without a roadmap, insight, or knowledge. We grew to respect each other's approach to the challenges ahead. Mostly, we lived in a state of patience and a vision for recovery rooted in optimism and seeded with hope. That's a really lovely, succinct way to explain what I would imagine most caregivers, family members,
Right.
partners of stroke survivors go through.
Mhm.
Uh, let's talk about that in a little bit. But now, why did you write the book? What was the purpose of it? What was the need for you to write this book? Was it personal? What was it?
Um. Well, based on the way that we were interacting while he was recovering, and the kind of back and forth, instead of playing 21 questions, we were playing 21,000 questions to get to the answer that he was looking for, and many of the conversations were hysterical. They were really funny. I mean, they were funny not because, oh, poor dad, he can't express himself. They were funny because he worked so hard at it, and the back and forth was funny. They were interesting, they were intriguing, and then the final answer was, it's like we had no idea where the conversations were going. I mean, he would start a conversation like 1 2. Well, what is that supposed to do? And over the course of many hours, sometimes 2 or 3 days, we would get to the answer to the question, you know, and and I felt really compelled to just keep track of these because I felt like they were gems. I just felt like they were an interesting journal of his journey to discover the answer to these crazy questions that he was asking. Um, and along the way, we learned a lot about how to communicate, how to ask a question, how to how to ask one question at a time instead of, you know, so what do you want to do today, and what would you like to eat, and have bunches of questions in the same sentence
Which is what I
when
do
we
in my podcast when I ask a question.
but in his case, he couldn't separate them out.
Mm.
And so it became really clear really early on that we can't ask questions like that, that we had to ask one question at a time. And then the conversations got to be really long because one question at a time, one answer at a time, they get to be long.
And are
But,
they open-ended questions or are they closed-ended questions?
well, like they may not even be questions that he was asking. They would be statements like 1, 2. Okay, now we have to figure out, what does 1, 2 mean? What does it mean to him? And so, okay, 1, 2 what, Dad? You know,
So there's a
and
bit of decryption that has to happen.
totally decryption, and then he would start off with another conversation would be once a day, every day, 7 days a week. Okay, now what? And we worked on that for 3.5 days, coming up with, well, what does one do once a day, every day, 7 days a week? And you come up with all the regular stuff. And then because he couldn't determine, okay, does it have to do with this? And, well, he doesn't know because he doesn't know what that is. Okay, if it's this point to the place on your face that it hurts, well, is it your nose? Well, he doesn't know what a nose is. Okay, so you can't point. So capturing those questions and answer periods made me think, God, there's something to this. I got to write this down. I got to write down these conversations. So first I simply started writing down the conversations. And then after a while, I realized, we went through this whole process. There's something here that might be useful to other people who are going through this process as well. And so that's what got me to write connective tissue stuff, to write not only the conversations, but more information, but yet it's not a medical book. I mean, I'm coming at this completely from, I love my dad. I wanted to see him get better, so that's ultimately, I started writing it very early on, like the fall after he had the stroke. I started writing these and remembering these conversations before I forgot them, and asking other people to remember the conversations they had with him that I wasn't there for. And, doing that helped me to pull together all the main dialogue, but then these other little bits and pieces of dialogue too, which seemed important. They seemed important to his recovery, and they seemed important for the possibility that other people might relate and they might benefit.
You're you work in the field of musicians and performing artists. Is any of those
Sure.
performing artists a comedian?
I have some comedian. I mean, I have some comedians that I work with. Actually, quite a few.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things that people get offended about is when somebody makes fun about stroke or
Yeah.
makes a joke about stroke. And I never got it. I never get how people get offended at anything that a comedian says, because you're going to actually experience a comedian's view of the world in a way that pokes fun at that thing.
Hmm.
And that's what they do. That's kind of their stick, right? That's
Right.
that's what
That's
they
just,
do.
yeah. Right.
And I found that stroke's really funny. There's a lot of funny things that happened in my 3 brain hemorrhages, my brain
Right.
surgery.
Right.
And one of the funniest things was I fell after surgery. I mean, it was hours after surgery. Maybe it was 2 or 3 hours after surgery. I'm in recovery. I've woken up and all that thing. And I've got a fresh, zipper on my head where they've got, I don't know, 40
The staples, right?
staples or something. And
The new
I,
Frankenstein, right?
yeah, it was pretty cool look for a little while. And then
Yeah.
I come out of bed because they've asked me to go to the bathroom, and I didn't know that my left side didn't work, and the nurses didn't know that my left side didn't work.
Oh, wow.
So I came out of bed on my left side, which is what I normally do. But when I put my
Fell.
foot on the ground, my foot didn't know that it was on the ground. So I collapsed. It couldn't hold my
course.
weight.
Right.
And that was scary, but hilarious at the same time. Like, you come out of surgery, you can't walk, and the first thing that happens is you fall straight to the ground, and you're
Right.
screaming with your butt hanging out onto the cold floor,
Right.
and your head, could just as easily have been hit again, which would have been terrible. But that now that I reflect on it, and imagine it making my brain leak out and all that kind of stuff,
Oh, God.
and it's horrific, but
It's funny.
it's hilarious. I think at the time it was hilarious. And another thing that happened that was hilarious was I was having my pre-surgery admission checkup, and we were going through everything, all the vitals, all the paperwork and all that.
Right.
And we just finished that, and we left, and we walked out the door. And as I walked out the door, I started to get a numb face. My entire face went numb. And I said to my wife, yeah, my face is numb and I can't feel it. And
Oh, my God.
she goes, let's go back into the hospital. So we turned around and we go back and we go to emergency. But because of the procedures that a hospital works by, of course, I'm not just going straight back into the consulting room. I have to sit at the emergency section and tell them what's going on, and they're going to go through their whole process. And
yeah, right.
They just don't get that.
The emergency of it.
Yeah, I'm a guy who just walked out of a consultation for surgery tomorrow or next week or whatever it was. So anyway, and I'm sitting there, and while I was sitting there, there was a mum arguing with her son, and her son must have been autistic or something like that.
Right.
They were communicating fine, but she realized that he had gone to the toilet and not washed his hands.
Oh, in the hospital.
For number twos.
Yeah.
For number twos. And he was sitting next to me.
Oh, great.
So in my concern about me and all the problems that I was experiencing physiologically from the stroke or whatever was going on in my head on that moment, it still wasn't bad enough. It wasn't that bad that it didn't occur to me that he might have something on his hand that I don't want to touch.
And so you're thinking that, yeah.
And as afraid and as sick as I was, I still had the ability to get up and just get out of there and go to the other side of the waiting room.
That's so funny.
I think it's hilarious. And
no, it's totally hilarious. In fact, I have a musician friend who very early in her career had a stroke and then wrote a book about all the funny things that happened in the hospital.
Yeah.
And had to reteach herself how to play guitar, had to, relearn all the music parts of her career. But that book really captured all of these kinds of incidences that go on,
Yeah.
The open gown and and all those kinds of things. Yeah. So.
And I've got a podcast and I interview people, and there's nearly 200 episodes, and
look at how it could be serious, but I mean, you look at how eloquent your speech is now.
it's all good, everything's great, and
Yeah.
I celebrate all those things. But what's
Yeah.
the thing about it is that I could have a really difficult time interviewing every single person about all the terrible things that happened during
Right.
stroke and how bad it was and all that kind of stuff. And it's like,
Right.
what's the point of focusing all your energy on how terrible and how difficult it all was? There's a lot of things that we could look at if we looked for the silver linings that we could
Well,
reflect on and
exactly.
allow us to just
Yes.
ease the stress and the tension a little bit about
Which
all
I
the
think
stuff.
is why this made so much sense to me,
Mm,
is because this these conversations were hilarious. We would just be rolling after finding the answers and going through all that we went through to get to the answers, and I really felt like there needs to be lightness in this. Like you can have so many, okay, do this, do this, do this kinds of uh informational books, but I felt like, why not? Why not capture this? Why not share this to perhaps in some way lighten the load for some of the people that are thinking, oh my God, this is, the end of the world as we know it. And so that's part of the big reason why I felt like, why not? If one person gets something out of it, I did my job.
and it helped you dealing with the seriousness of your dad's stroke, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the other piece of the puzzle that became very evident to me was having positivity. Being positive no matter what was going on with any kind of depression or negativity, that I felt me and the people around dad, all, the his friends, family, we all had to come at everything with being positive, upbeat, um, to comfort him, to calm him, to make it be more likely that he would continue to recover, as opposed to being depressed by his depression. So I I felt like that was so important. I had come up with this little catchphrase for him in the hospital. I call it the 5 Ps. Be um, when you're positive and patient. Um, what is it? I remember. It was like so long ago that I couldn't
Yeah,
remember what it was, and I
I'm
had to like
curious too.
write it down. But it was a cool thing that got him out of his stuff.
Yeah.
And I felt like that was important. Oh, okay. When you're positive and patient, when you persevere and practice, then anything is possible.
That's a terrible thing to say to a stroke survivor who can't talk. It's a tongue twister.
I know it's a tongue twister, and that's why I did it, because I was trying to get him to practice his P's.
All right, I have to write it down. I have to write
Okay,
it down.
okay. When you're positive and patient, when you persevere and practice, then anything is possible.
Fantastic. All right. I love that. I
Uh,
might
uh,
share that.
uh, Go for it, pass it around. But I felt like any time that I could come up with things that broke his concentration on, oh my God, I can't believe I'm in this place. So I would always come up with these kinds of fun things and play games and try as much as possible to distract him from his stuff, to get him to work and to see that, well, maybe it's not so bad, and look, we're here, we're working at it, you know. And having my dog there was a major benefit for him.
Uh-huh.
He loved the dog, and I would, as often as we could, bring the dog to the hospital during his rehab, couldn't go in because he wasn't a service dog, even though he kind of was a self-appointed therapy dog. But we couldn't go in, so Dad would meet us in the, downstairs outside when he was able to do that in the wheelchair, and it just brightened his day all the time. And it was also a really great thing to say he respected the dog sometimes more than he respected the people. So like when we would want to leave to go home to eat or to go to sleep, as long as I said, "Oh, we have to walk the dog," then it was okay to leave. But it was just like I have to go home because I'm tired and I need sleep or I need to eat. He would try to pull we always caught him pulling a 8:55 thing where at 8:55 he would ask a big question that would require much time to answer the question. So we couldn't leave, until we figured that out.
Wow. See, I like the way that you scammed him out of being there for a bit longer. And nonetheless, though, I'm not
Yeah,
sure
but he
if you
scammed us first
for being
for
there.
like
Yeah.
3 nights. For three
Yeah.
nights, he figured once he figured out how to tell time, he got it, and he would watch the clock, and it's like 8:45, 8:50, 8:55. Boom! Here comes the big question. That's like, what is the meaning of life? Kind of a
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
And it took us 3 nights to figure out. Oh man, he did it again.
Yeah.
You know.
I think the other thing it demonstrates is the importance for you to actually take care of yourself, because
Oh,
it doesn't matter
absolutely.
how unwell your dad is. If you're not taking
Right.
care of yourself and you become unwell, there's no
Right.
point having two members of the family unwell. And it's no point
Right.
you feeling guilty about taking care of yourself. You've got to take care of yourself. And the
Absolutely.
stroke survivor has to allow other people to take care of themselves and have time to themselves, because it's 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 both your journeys, but it's not your burden.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, but for the survivor, they might not be thinking that way.
Yeah. And they might not have the capacity to think that way either.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's mostly the case. So it was really important for me, being sort of a health nut, to make sure that I got what I needed in terms of exercise, being outside, time away, the ability to cook the foods that were going to be healthy for him and healthy for me, and be able to manage my minimal business at the time, but because it was remote and internet based, I could do it anywhere. But it was very important for self-care, and I think that that's a big thing to talk to people about: taking care of yourself, being mentally, spiritually, emotionally able to handle the situation, because not every situation is going to be as handleable as ours was. Many are going to be more difficult.
Did you put your life on hold from where you were living to stay with your dad? Why did you hang out and
Yeah.
plant yourself there?
Yeah. Um, I mean, that's why I took the dog and half of my kitchen and all the things that I thought I could fit in the car just in case I had to stay. Well, I needed to, well, rather than answering 15 phone calls in every day from home to try to solve problems,
Mm,
I realized it was just going to be better for me to be there. I was able to do it. I had my movable business that I could do anywhere. And I just figured, my house and all the things that I had back in Virginia could be managed long distance. And it was better to take care of business for him being there, being, you know, taking care of the aide, managing the household, managing his business, managing my business. It was so much easier to just be there with him to do it. And and he appreciated it immensely. Uh, like when I told him that I was going to stay. So I stayed for like from November to June. Then I did go back to Virginia for a couple of months to take care of my house and renovating something that I had to do for renting my apartment again. And then I came back in November and then just stayed for the next couple of years
Yeah.
until he passed. But then I just moved down here. And so, in preparation to stay with him while he was recovering, and then I moved down here, and then a month later, he passed.
Well, that's inconvenient.
It was totally inconvenient. But,
What ended
you know,
up happening? Why did he pass?
because of end stage renal disease, kidney failure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Which was something that he had battled even before the stroke. But he was recovering from the stroke really nicely. I mean, he was back able to play bridge and was as good or better than his other friends. So that was a big accomplishment for him.
Yeah. It
And
sounds like
then
he
all
had
the other health stuff got in the way.
yeah, they tend to catch up with you sometimes.
Yeah, right,
But it's
right,
great
right.
that he was able to have a reasonable quality of life for the amount of time that he had after the
Right,
stroke. And he
right,
had that
right.
little win and that little battle, and he overcome some things, and he gave you and other people around him a good example of how one should approach these things or tackle these things. So everything about it is really positive and really a good outcome. And
Yeah, it seemed so.
it's worth the fight, isn't it? I mean, it doesn't matter what age you are, and it doesn't.
That's the
It's
point,
worth the
I
fight.
think. It doesn't matter.
Yeah,
Why give up just because you're older?
yeah,
There's still amazing things that one could be doing. Who knew that, you're going to find love again at 80, at 83, 84,
mm,
How do you know that? You don't know until it just happens. So it was worth all of the effort that we put into helping him discover ways of conquering his his challenges.
yeah. As we wrap up, I haven't read the book because I get
Yeah, it's a
a,
lot.
I get a lot of books. People send a lot of
I'm
books across
sure.
to me, and I don't have time.
I'm sure.
But I do love going through them and getting familiarizing myself
Yeah.
a little bit with them. And I got stopped at chapter 6, the big bird that jumps up and down. Just give me a bit of an understanding of what I'm going to find when I read that chapter.
Okay. Well, I was going. Sometimes I would have lunch with Dad during his break in the hospital, and where the hospital was down the block from where I was going to get my takeout for lunch, and I was going to Chipotle. And he didn't. The one thing he didn't lose was his sense of direction. So I would tell him where I was going. He could not remember names of anything. And so this conversation happens between a nurse, Estelle, his girlfriend, and Dad, saying, where was I going? What was I doing? And so he was using um, landmarks. And the landmark he was using was the Outback Steakhouse. And he thought, I don't know if I should give it away or if I should just read it.
It's it's up to you. It's only one chapter out of all of them, but
it, it's just because it's too funny. I mean, should I?
yeah, just
Uh,
one.
uh,
Just go for it. Let's do it.
all right, all right, all right, all right, all right. One day I planned my lunch visit around an errand to the pet store to pick up some dog food and other supplies. The pet store was a couple of miles down the road from the hospital, so I stopped at Chipotle for my takeout. I told him where I was going. and mentioned the name of the restaurant and what kind of food they served. He lost a number of things with his stroke, but not his sense of direction and where things were. He knew exactly where I was going and what other stores and restaurants were in the general area. He just couldn't remember their names. Always excited about my visits and activities, he would tell his therapists, staff, nurses, and other visitors what I was up to and when I would be coming. On this day, he tried to describe my whereabouts and activities in the following manner to a staff member and Estelle. She's coming for lunch. Who's coming for lunch? My daughter. She had to get dog food. Where did she go? Down the street. Then she's getting her lunch. Where is she getting lunch? Down the street. You know that place. Which one? It's near that other restaurant. Which one? It's near the pet food store. It's not from here. What do you mean it's not from here? It's from someplace else. You mean the restaurant is from someplace else? Yes. She's not going there. She's just going near there. You mean she's not going to this place for her food? It's just near this place? Yes, but I don't remember her place. My names, my names. I don't remember names. This other place down the block has a big bird. What kind of big bird? Is it outside? No, it's not outside. It comes from the place where they have big birds. What kind of place has big birds? How big? Very big. They jump up and down. You know, the bird that jumps up and down, they carry their babies in their bellies. The bird that carries babies in its belly and jumps up and down, what kind of bird is that? Very big, only in that place, never here, only in that place. Okay, the restaurant has a big bird that jumps up and down and carries its baby in its belly. Well, the restaurant comes from the same place the big bird comes from. Do you mean a kangaroo? A kangaroo is not a big bird, but it does carry its baby in its belly. Yes, a kangaroo. That's not a bird? No, that's not a bird. Do you mean Australia? Kangaroos are in Australia. Yes, Australia. That's the place. That's the place the restaurant comes from. What restaurant comes from Australia? You know, they have onions. We've eaten there a lot. Lots of steak. Oh, I know, you mean Outback. Yes, that's the place that comes from Australia, but she's not getting lunch there. Then where is she getting lunch? Oh, I can't remember the name, but it's near Outback. Oy vey. All of that, and she's still not even going there for her lunch. Well, we'll just have to ask her where she went when she gets back. When I returned, Estelle had left, and Dad and I were all alone to have lunch. Where did you get lunch? I went to Chipotle. Chipotle, Dad. It's near the pet food store. He tried to say it, but had a hard time and didn't try for very long. But when he tried to explain the recent conversation about the big bird that jumps up and down, we had to rehash most of the conversation since he had already forgotten Outback. We went through a few minutes of the jumping bird story, and when he mentioned that the bird carries its baby in its belly, I chimed in immediately. Do you mean a kangaroo? Do you mean Outback Steakhouse? To his great relief, and with a smirk on his face, he said, Oh, yes, baby, yes, Outback. I understood that he was using landmarks, and he knew to try to describe where he had gone for my takeout. We both laughed hard when I realized what a crazy conversation this must have been. Hearing about it later from Estelle, I was able to capture the details, and we were all hysterical at the retelling. Estelle said that he would not let it go, and he was determined to make his point until someone recognized Outback. I think for Dad, from then on, every time he passed an Outback Steakhouse, he thought of that big bird that jumps up and down and remembered his crazy conversation to make himself understood.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. So when I first read the chapter headline, I thought it was Big Bird from Sesame Street.
Yeah, I know.
For sure, it was going to be Big Bird, and then to see how the Big Bird turned into a kangaroo,
I know.
and how that was the attempt to describe the outback, which is a very common thing that we say about our
Right.
desert and our
Of course.
and the
Of
middle of
course.
our
Right.
country over
Right.
here. It just it's just amazing that somehow, even though that seems like a ridiculous way to get to that outcome, it is a great example of
Right.
how outcomes can be got to, and
Right.
the importance of the role that the person is playing that's
Right.
listening to that
Right.
conversation and trying to facilitate the
Right.
memory or
Right.
the answer to come
Right.
out and
Right.
to be
So
understood.
this is what these conversations are like, similar to that.
Yeah.
It starts off with something and you have no idea where it's going. And then when you get to the end, you go, oh my God, it's like, I can't believe that that it started with something so crazy like that.
Yeah. I think this is going to make a big difference and help a lot of people understand aphasia and
Right.
understand what people go through to get to be able to communicate and to
Right.
share their feelings, thoughts, and
Or,
whatever it is that they need to
right.
express.
Right.
So that's where I see it doing a lot of amazing work. And stroke survivors will also, that have been through it, will also relate to it a lot and be able to
I'll bet because they
appreciate it.
know what they were holding in their head and how they were, hard at work trying to make
Mm.
themselves understood if they were going through aphasia like that. So I'm hoping, I hope that, and I thought I picked out that story to read, and then I went online to just check to see, well, where is Outback actually from, and it's from right here in Florida. It's not from
But
Australia at all.
at all.
And
But he associates the name to Australia,
well, I
which
mean,
is
well, it's like Australian inspired food,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
you know.
And he
I
went
cracked
all
up.
around the world to get that answer, and
Yeah,
he got there. Look at that, just
yeah,
for something that was down the road.
that's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
um,
Really,
I
really
really
funny.
appreciate you reaching out, Jeri, and sharing your story and letting us know about the book. I think it is going to be something that does shed some light on a
Yeah,
difficult time that people go through, and then
sure.
makes it a little bit funny and allows people to see the possibility for humor and
Exactly.
to embrace it and to feel good about having a laugh
Right.
about some really difficult times.
Right. 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 Right.
And I'd just like to ask you, if people wanted to get in touch with you or
Sure.
find a copy of the book when it's available, where would they go?
Well, it will be on Amazon, and it will be on Amazon Australia, um, as well as every Amazon wherever it is. Um, and they can also go right to strokedialogues.com, my website, and there'll be links to get either the PDF, and eventually I'm going to do an audio version. So hopefully I keep procrastinating on that one. But I've got my little studio set up in my closet right next to me here, and I've got that microphone that you've got there, and I'm all ready to go. I just gotta find quiet space when they're not cutting trees in front of my house.
Which is
And
every single moment you sit down to record something.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah. But this is a brilliant time. At 10:30 at night, my time. There's nobody's doing any work outside. It's great.
Well, there you go. Now you know
There
when
you
to
go.
sit down and record
That's
your audio
exactly
version.
it. Now that I know that I can make it to this time and be lively and bubbly, I can probably go ahead and do it now.
Yeah, well done. Well, thank you so much for
Yeah.
being on the podcast. I really
Oh, thank you
appreciate it.
so much, and thanks for doing the podcast after your situation and thinking, hey, I couldn't talk, I couldn't think. I think I'll do a podcast.
Mm.
That's a pretty amazing thing to come to that
It
place.
was a ridiculous idea, and I had
It's a
no
lot
idea.
of work.
I don't
A
know
lot of
why
work.
I even thought of it or how I got to it. I just felt
Yeah.
like I needed to connect with people, and I used it as an excuse to
Yes.
talk about stroke more often.
Perfect.
And it was just like a it was about me at the beginning, and then it really
Sure.
rapidly changed,
Yeah.
and it's still about me, but it's about everybody else and all
It's
the other
brilliant. It's brilliant.
things,
I mean,
you know.
I listened to many of your episodes, and each one really touches obviously on different topics with different people's experiences,
Mm,
but your ability to pull stuff out of people
mm,
is brilliant and sensitive and lovely, quite
yeah.
lovely.
Thank you. It means a lot to me, and I get a lot out of it. So, and I always love it when people reach out to me and say they want to be on the podcast. That's even better than me trying to drag them
Having
along.
to right,
Yeah.
right. Well,
Um,
yeah, that's great. I don't know how, I came to it, but I was looking up, all kinds of resources so that I can get the word out and so that I can, hopefully make a difference. And yours was one of the first ones that popped up, and I loved it. And so I just started listening and paying attention to what you're doing, and it was brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you so
You
much.
bet. You bet. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on.
Well, thanks for joining us on today's episode. Please comment, like, and share this episode. If you are watching on YouTube, subscribe, hit the notification bell to get updates of new episodes as they become available. The more interactions with an episode, the more the algorithm will push the episode out to more people that need to see this episode, and the greater the impact the interviews will make. Thanks again for being here and listening. I really appreciate you. And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.
Importantly, we present many podcasts designed to give you an insight and understanding into the experiences of other individuals. Opinions and treatment protocols discussed during any podcast are the individual's own experience, and we do not necessarily share the same opinion, nor do we recommend any treatment protocol discussed. All content on this website and any linked blog, podcast, or video material controlled this website or content is created and produced for informational purposes only and is largely based on the personal experience of Bill Gassiamis. The content is intended to complement your medical treatment and support healing. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice and should not be relied on as health advice. The information is general and may not be suitable for your personal injuries, circumstances, or health objectives. Do not use our content as a standalone resource to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease for therapeutic purposes or as a substitute for the advice of a health professional. Never delay seeking advice or disregard the advice of a medical professional, your doctor, or your rehabilitation program based on our content. If you have any questions or concerns about your health or medical condition, please seek guidance from a doctor or other medical professional. If you are experiencing a health emergency or think you might be, call 000 if in Australia, or your local emergency number immediately for emergency assistance, or go to the nearest hospital emergency department. Medical information changes constantly. While we aim to provide current, quality information in our content, we do not provide any guarantees and assume no legal liability or responsibility for the accuracy, currency, or completeness of the content. If you choose to rely on any information within our content, you do so solely at your own risk. We are careful with links we provide. However, third-party links from our website are followed at your own risk, and we are not responsible for any information you find there.